Lord, pour out your Spirit on your word this morning. In the name of Yeshua, we pray. How many people can say amen to that? Okay. I want you to take a look at me and listen to what I have to say today. I really believe this is increasingly a more and more important message. Every week, God is speaking very deep things about what he wants to do in each of our lives. The name of this series is called The Story of the Seed, and we're following the seed of Messiah as God steers the nation, unbeknownst to them, to their destiny. We've seen in this ministry of reconciliation an ongoing pattern of broken family relationships in Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and his wives and their children, and between the 10 sons and Joseph. It's really so far been a disaster. But in the midst of this story, there's an amazing story being written. We see the carriers of the seed, these unique women that in the genealogy of Matthew are the only women recorded in any of the genealogies in the New Testament. We see the mention of Sarah and Rebekah and Rachel, carriers of the seed of Messiah. And then the two unsuspecting ones, the one today, the seed of Messiah being carried. The carrier is a woman because the promise originally made in the Garden of Eden was that there's going to be a battle between the seed of the woman and the seed of the adversary. And you can see in Scripture that this adversarial relationship continues right through into our days and on till the end of time. But the fact is that God, it's not just about the seed, the male who passes his seed on, but God has made it very clear in his word that the carrier of the seed will be a woman until we get to the point which the whole world celebrates in the next couple of weeks, the birth of Yeshua. And he'll be born of a Jewish virgin who lives in Bethlehem, and that seed will finally come forth in two observant Jews living in Bethlehem. It will be a virgin birth. It will be the seed of the woman without a man. It's going to be the seed of the woman. And so we want to honor these women. Some of them are highly unlikely that we would have chosen them, but God clearly chose these women, Sarah, Rebekah, Rachel. He especially chose a Canaanite woman who was forbidden to marry because God saw something in Tamar and said in his heart, she's going to carry the seed of my son. And then Ruth, outlawed for decades, not able to come in for generations into the household of Israel. And this Moabite woman, God looked upon her and said, this is what I'm looking for. Someone who has lived a life of unbelievable grief and sorrow. She lost her husband. Her two sons married non-Jews, and they went to live among those nations. And both of those men died, and now she's a widow with two widows. And she said, just call me Mara, bitter. But Ruth marries Boaz. And Boaz. And Ruth gives birth to a son. And they give birth to a son. And she becomes the great-grandmother of King David, through whom now we know, not only through the tribe of Judah, but now King David. It is his son that will sit on the throne forever and ever. In this message today, I want to talk to you about how God has spanned the centuries to bring this ministry of reconciliation to us. He has paid an enormous price, not only himself, but an enormous price in the pain and suffering without any explanation. God didn't explain why he told Abraham, your descendants will be slaves for 400 years. He didn't give him an explanation about the suffering of 400 years of slavery. But it's still a part of the story. So the people have suffered because there's a message coming about the suffering servant Messiah, and the people of Israel must suffer because those are some of the types and shadows that reveal to us that our Redeemer is not just coming to give us victory, but he's a suffering servant who comes and dies, who rises from the dead. But when he comes again, he comes not as the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world, but the Lion of Judah. What I want you to notice in this story as we look at this, I call it an adjudication. Judah's adjudication. I want you to understand in the background of this story, there's more to the story. Let's look at this. Remember, these are the words that God spoke in Genesis 15. Then he said to Avram, "Know for certain your seed will be strangers in the land that is not theirs, and they will be enslaved and oppressed for 400 years. But I am going to judge the nation that they will serve. Afterward they will go out with many possessions. But you will come to your fathers in peace. You will be buried at a good old age. Then in the 4th generation they will return here, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete." Now, as I've said, this series is called The Story of the Seed. And what I want to remind you of is, as we look at all of the people involved in this particular story, this narrative, the most important one is that the whole family now, after this reconciliation takes place, Joseph, after he reconciles with his brothers, says, "Go tell Dad and tell Dad to bring everything he owns back." And what does he bring with him? Tamar, with twins. And one of them, Peretz, is a carrier of that seed. That seed which will change the world. But something else astonishing is taking place. This whole nation of Israel is like one seed in the hand of God that God is going to plant in this womb of Egypt. That's what these words in Genesis 15 are telling us. God is viewing the whole nation as a seed. These first 3 generations of God's people are one seed. And that seed is going to be embedded in the womb of Egypt, and it's going to be in gestation. It's going to be in process for 400 years until God gives birth to the nation of Israel. 10 birth pangs, 10 plagues, 10 signs and wonders, all revealing that by water, when the waters break and God parts the sea, that God is giving birth to a nation. That destiny is what we see in the story here already. That it's not only going to save Israel, he's not just doing to save Joseph, is not being used to just save his family, but all the nations of the world. That's been the message from the beginning. It's never been any different. And so I want you to just for a moment with me to examine this story, because what happens here can happen for each and every one of us. In God's providence, it's happening for the Lesters. And it's happening if you have broken relationships in your family. You can believe God. You may not understand it all. You don't have to understand it all, but you can say, "Lord, I want that ministry of reconciliation to come down upon me. I want it to fall on me. I want to be immersed in that ministry of reconciliation that will not allow me to extend evil for evil to anyone that I've ever known. In any broken relationship, I'm asking you to heal me so I can be an instrument of healing to everyone around me." That's this ministry of reconciliation. Now, we heard this story, but I want to just lay it out for you. Joseph, and I want to tell you, Joseph is a type of the Messiah. We've been talking about it. But guess what? This is about Joseph's worst nightmare in his fleshly experience. He has contrived, and with his gift, God gave him an astonishing gift of administration. And that gift of administration was, even as the youngest child, he was already made the administrator over his brothers. He was sold into slavery, and he went to be a slave in Potiphar's house. And when he got there, he said, wow, God is with him. He made him an administrator of his whole house. They threw him in prison on a false accusation. And in the prison, the head of the prison said, "I like this guy." Put him ahead of the prison. Then he had a prophetic ministry, interpreting dreams. One lived, one died. And then God gave Pharaoh a dream, a horrifying dream. He didn't understand it, and no one in Egypt could. Finally, one of those men said, "I remember there was a Hebrew young man who could interpret dreams." They called up Joseph, and Joseph came. He interpreted the dreams. He ends up being raised up to literally be the administrator of the entire nation of Egypt. And on top of that, he's put in charge of saving all the food in the first 7 years so they can feed the nations in the coming 7 years of famine. God revealed a plan. He used Joseph to bring that plan. And yet, Joseph still does not understand his own dreams when he was a young man, where his brothers came and bowed down to him. He was 17 years old. Now he's 30. And his brothers are standing in front of him. But he's bitter. This is the one darkness in the life of Joseph. He hatches a plan. He creates a situation where he decides, I hate these guys. I don't want to see their faces. He named his children after his suffering. He said, Lord, thank you for letting me forget. So he named his kids Remember. Remember my suffering. Can you imagine that? Why would you name your son, when you name him, at least name him Forget? No, he named Remember my suffering and grief at the hands of my family. That's what he named his son. And then he named his other son after the grief of being in the land of his oppression. He's running the country. He's still calling it the land of his oppression. So he hatches this plan. After they go back and forth with food and all the stresses that we read about in the family, about you have to bring the youngest son. Why did Joseph want the brother? Well, we saw in the story. When they left last week, Joseph took his gold cup and he put it in his brother Benjamin's bag. He let them go. Very reminiscent of the story of Laban, when the daughters of Laban leave with Jacob, and they steal his idols, and Laban comes down. There's an army chasing Jacob, and they don't find it because his wife is sitting on the idols. Notice they had idols. They weren't Jewish, right? And now we're looking at a situation where this incredible story has unfolded, and there is Joseph, and he has a plan. He puts the cup in Benjamin's bag, and he chases them down just like Laban chased Jacob down. And they get there. He says, someone stole the man in charge gold cup. And they go, oh, we're innocent. We've learned our lessons. That's not us. They didn't know they were being set up. See, there's purpose in what Joseph is doing. What's his purpose? He wants all this to fall on Benjamin because he wants Benjamin to live with him and send his brothers far away, never to see them again. That's his plan. But what he doesn't plan for are the pronouns that will come out of Judah's mouth. Surely he could depend on Judah to say, don't kill him, sell him. But he hears a different story. He sees a changed man. And how is Judah changed? Keep in mind in this story, there's three sets of two children. 3 sets of 2 children. First, there's Jacob's 2 sons. In his mind, one is dead and one is left. In Judah, and when he went away from his family, he had 3 sons, 2 died, and 1 is left. You hear the parallel? 1 is left. What has Judah learned? He has learned to have a heart of compassion because he now understands the pain of his father. He left his father and brothers because of his own guilt and the consequences of his own sin. He watched his father go into a decades-long darkness, a depression, and there was nothing he could do about it, so he left, and he found another family, and he had 3 sons, and 2 of them died. And he withheld his 3rd son from Tamar because he didn't want to lose the only son he had left. In Jacob's eyes, Benjamin is the only son he has left. Now that is Jacob's sin as well, that he loved these 2. Isn't it interesting? He loved these 2 sons born of Rachel. But where is the seed of Messiah? Is it from Rachel? No! It's Leah. So it wasn't Laban that put Leah first to be his wife? It was God. It wasn't Laban ripping off Joseph. It was God saying, she's going to carry the seed, Judah. And so the plan of God is different than what we think it is. It's not as easy. That's why it's a trust relationship with God. It's a trust in Him, even when we don't understand the circumstances around us. And so now Joseph is running Egypt. And how many sons does he have? 2 sons. So there's the 2 lost sons of Judah. The 2 sons of Jacob. One is dead and the other is left and in trouble. And Jacob, he says, well, I guess he'll have to go. If I lose him, I'll lose him too. And then there's Joseph's 2 sons. Isn't it interesting? The only one with his 2 sons intact in his life are the 2 that were born to a slave who's become the king of Egypt. Tell me this isn't about God's sovereignty. You could try, but it won't work. It's about God's sovereignty. Now, in this story, what is happening here are all of these parts of this puzzle come to play in the story. So now, the cup has been found with Benjamin, and the statement of all the brothers is, we're guilty. We deserve all the sin and the slavery we're about to be taken into. We deserve it. They're not even angry at Benjamin. They know they're guilty. They've been talking about their guilt for months. And now they recognize that the hand of God has accused them and found them guilty, not for the sins that they thought they were guilty of, but for the sins of selling their brother into slavery. They have no idea that this is going on. And so Judah says, okay, we're all going to be your slaves. And then Joseph reveals his final part of the plan. Oh, no. Only the one in whose bag the cup was found, he will be guilty and be my slave. The rest of you can go to Haran. The rest of you can go home. The rest of you can go back to Canaan. Don't worry about it. But Judah says, and why does he say this to himself? Well, I can't let that happen. I gave an assurity to my father that I would be responsible for bringing Benjamin with me. And the one who says, don't kill Joseph, sell him into slavery, now says, look, if we go home without Benjamin, our father will die, not knowing that our father also applies to the person he's talking to, who he doesn't know is his brother. But all the pronouns land on Joseph like a stone too heavy to hold. And each part of the words, Judah starts with these words. He goes, my Lord, you asked me. You asked your servants, do you have a father or a brother? And we said, yes, we have a father who is old and a child of his old age, a little one whose brother is dead. You. But I don't know it's you. So that his mother's children, he alone, Benjamin, is left and his father loves him. Has Jacob learned his lesson about what favoritism does in a family system? No. He didn't even take solace in his other 9 children, another 10 kids. He didn't take solace in them. He acted as if they were dead too. That's the orphan spirit. Joseph in his parenting has made all his sons feel like orphans. The brothers helped Joseph feel like an orphan. And can you imagine how all this lands on Benjamin, the one who he can't let out of his sight? But you said to your servants, bring him to me so I can see that you're telling me the truth and you're not spies. But the boy can't leave his father, I said. If he were to leave his father, Joseph. Now here's what's happening in the spirit. Here's what Joseph's hearing. If he would leave his father would die. But what Joseph heard was, if Joseph does not go home, your father Joseph will die, and that will be on you. Now Judah didn't say it, but the Spirit of God said it. You said to your servant, you will not see my face again until your brother is with you. And we went to your servant, our father, your father, and our father. He didn't know he was only. Joseph knew those pronouns were attached to him, but his brothers didn't. We answered, we can't go. Only if our youngest brother is with us, we told our father, will we go down, because we can't see this man's face again unless our youngest brother is with us. And the father said, then your servant, my father, said to us, you know that my wife bore me, everybody, sons, everybody. My wife bore me. One went out for me, and I said, surely he's been torn to pieces. He's telling Joseph this story. And I haven't seen him since. Now, if you take this one away from me too, and something happens to him, you will bring my gray hair down to Sheol with grief. And so now if I go to your servant, my father, your father, and the boy isn't with us, your brother, seeing how his heart, your brother's heart, is bound up with the boy's heart, your father's heart, and the boy's heart, and your heart, when he sees that the boy, your brother, isn't with us, he, your father, will die. And your servants will bring the gray hair of your servant, our father. And Joseph hears, I will bring a death to my father. And notice at the end of this, he says, is my father alive? Why? He doesn't believe his brothers ever tell him the truth to begin with, because they never did when he knew them. So he doesn't know if they're lying, trying to manipulate their way around these circumstances, just trying to get out of trouble like they used to do when he was in charge. But when he, your father, or our father, your father, sees that the boy isn't with us, he, Jacob, your father, will die. And your servants, including you, Joseph, will bring the gray hair of your servant, our father, down to Sheol. For your servant himself, Judah, me, he says, me, I gave my father in a surety, Judah, your servant, Judah, the one carrying the seed in Tamar, in Peretz. I will bear the blame before my father forever. And then listen to this, verse 33. Therefore, I beg you, let your servant stay as a slave. Judah, who said, don't kill him, sell him, is saying, I will take my brother's place. Let the boy go up with his brothers. This is why Judah is the seed that gets carried by Tamar, because only the Messiah will understand the necessity for him to lay his own life down in our place. And here's Judah finally doing what he could not do when his brother cried out to him. Therefore, I beg you, let your servant stay as a slave to my Lord instead of the boy, and let the boy go up with his brothers, for how can I go up to my father if the boy isn't with me? I couldn't bear to see my father so overwhelmed by anguish. Now we know why he left his family, why he went and married a Canaanite and had 3 children with another family, didn't live with his family, because of the grief he saw his father living with. And these astonishing words. And people, I want to tell you prophetically, I believe we're on the verge of a great revival among our Jewish people. Think about these words. It is soon going to become true that the spirit of Joseph and the spirit of recognizing Joseph is going to become the spirit of recognizing Yeshua. At last, Joseph could no longer control his feelings. And there's a very interesting statement in that, isn't there, Joel? What happens to a person who always controls their feelings? They suffer. Now God has placed Joseph in a position where he could not control his emotions. He thought he had it, but he didn't. He now hears, and this is what he's thinking because he's an administrator. What am I going to do? If I don't change my plan, I will do to my father what my brothers did to me. Horrified. You think they're going to be horrified when he tells, he's already horrified. He now understands. That's why the consequences and the truth of this statement, God painting him into a spiritual corner. So, you've been pretty good administrator, pretty much in control of your emotions. You've been able to overlook everything that most people couldn't overlook, but you can't overlook this. You can't become guilty of the same sin you're up toward your father that your brothers committed against you. At last, Joseph could no longer control his feelings in front of his attendants. Notice, he only controlled his feelings in front of others. He regularly went and wept and cried, crying out to God. And maybe in one of those weeping fits, he named his children. I'm going to name you my son who helps me forget how my family treated me. Cracks me up. So he cries out, everybody get away from me. So no one else was with him when Joseph revealed to his brothers who he was. His plan was broken. His self-centeredness to take his brother. What was he doing? He's not just trying to get his own brother. He's actually reliving his father's sin. Who only loved these two from Rachel because he was really in love with Rachel. But the seed, the one who carries the seed is Leah. And Judah carries that seed. Now Judah is adjudicating Joseph. And Joseph's plan is now broken. Something he administered didn't work, maybe for the first time in his life. And so he cries out. In their dialect of Hebrew Aramaic, a man who had only at this point spoken Egyptian through an interpreter, giving the impression that he didn't understand that when they were confessing their sins to one another, that he heard it. It's like one of those phone calls. Hi, this is the insurance company. This phone call is going to be recorded so that we can train people. It's really so we have a record of what you said. So you know what I say when I get one of those phone calls? I said, just want you to know, I'm also recording this conversation. Can you imagine the stress on Joseph at this moment? And so he cries out, Ani Yosef, ha'od ani chai. Chai is life. I am Joseph. Is it true that my father is chai? He lives? How many times did they tell him he was alive? He only believed they were liars. So now he wants to know for sure. See, Joseph isn't without sin at this point. But thank God, no matter how good you may be, if you control your emotions because you're such a good person, it means that God's going to have to bring about something in your life to shake your tree, to shake the fruit, to shake your life to the point that you are going to have to bow the knee to God because you can't be your own Savior and you can't be your own God. Ani Yosef ha'od avichai. His brothers couldn't answer him. Whoa, they were so dumbfounded. What an understatement. They were so dumbfounded at seeing him that Joseph said to his brothers, please come closer. Geshuna Eli. And they came closer. Vayigash-The. They came closer. Now I believe that what he did was he now heard his lips speaking their language. See, Egyptians looked really different than shepherds. Shepherds had bushy beards and long hair, and they wore cruddy garments compared to, he looked like a guy going down a runway. He's dressed in gold and silver. He's got gold chains. He's dressed up. His hair is back. He's clean shaven. There's no hair. He's got a head covering, something that looks like even a sign of authority on his head. He's got this big, expensive staff, and it's got jewels in it, and he's running the country. And they don't recognize him because he looks like and sounds like an Egyptian. He doesn't speak the language of the shepherds from Canaan. They hear out of that mouth their language, their words, and the dialect that only they speak. And they're dumbfounded. And then he says it again. He goes, come closer. So they come closer, and I've read everything I could find on this over the years, and I really think this is the best interpretation here, is he called them to come closer because he opened his robe and he said, I'm not just speaking the same language. I've got the same inscription in my circumcision that you do. I believe he showed them the signature that he's Joseph, because they have matching Brit Milahs. Probably Eliezer of Damascus, who was the one administrating those Brit Milahs. Right there in the corner it said, Eliezer of Damascus. I am Joseph, your brother, who you sold into Egypt. Ani Yosef achichem, asher mechartem, oti Mitzrayma. But you don't be sad. Now, here's where Joseph gets it. Gets relieved of his guilt, his hatred, his bitterness. It's all draining out as if he had a clogged drain and the Roto-Rooter came, found the clog, emptied the clog, and all his bitterness and anger and hate went right out through the drain. Why? Because now he finally understands the interpretation of the dreams that he had when he was 17. God wasn't having them bow down because he's great. He was having them bow down because God was going to save them with a great deliverance. And all of a sudden, Joseph, in the midst of these two, I am your brother Joseph, who you sold into slavery, says this. But don't be sad that you sold me into slavery here. Or don't be angry at yourselves because it was God who sent me ahead of you to preserve life. The famine has been over the land for the last 2 years, and yet another 5 years there will be neither plowing nor harvest. God sent me. Now he gets it. And once he gets God's plan, he rejects his own plan. And he rejects his own plan to embrace God's plan. All of a sudden, Joseph, the man of God, soars in the truth. God sent me ahead of you to ensure that you will have descendants on the earth and to save your lives with a great deliverance. Now, in the Hebrew, this phrase even implies what God told Abraham. Remember what he told Abraham? You'll be strangers in the land for 400 years, but I will judge that nation and that you will serve, and afterward you will go out with many possessions, but you will come to your fathers in peace, and you will be buried at good old age. Then in the fourth generation they will return here, but the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete. Later on, he says, and I'm going to deliver you out of the land and bring you back to the land of Canaan. What? But don't be sad that you sold me into slavery here, or be angry with yourselves, because it was God who sent me ahead of you to preserve life. Joseph just got a clue. He's no longer clueless. He tells them about the famine and the harvest. He tells them that God sent him. He sent me ahead of you to ensure. Notice that he has reframed his entire beliefs. I mean, do you see that? He named his children after those beliefs. I'm in the land of my sorrows and oppression, and this son is the son of the family that rejected me. He's just changed everything he believed in a moment because the truth opened his eyes and ears, and he said, oh my gosh. So it was not you who sent me here, but God. And he has made me a father of Pharaoh, Lord of all his household, and ruler over the whole land of Egypt. Hurry, go up and to my father and tell him, here is what your son Joseph says. God has made me Lord of Egypt. Can you imagine those boys who lied all their lives telling their dad, oh, he's alive. Yeah, right. Come down to me, don't delay. You will live in the land of Goshen and be near me, your children, your grandchildren, flocks and herds, and everything you own. Do you remember when Abraham left Haran? What did he leave with? Everything he owned. Because he said, Hineni, and the Lord said, leave your father's house and go to where I send you. Somehow that turns out to be Egypt. God has made me Lord, so come down and don't delay. Now then he gives some advice to his brothers, and I thought, this is just kind of funny. Thus he sent his brothers on their way, and they left, and he said, don't quarrel among yourselves while you're traveling. I know you guys. And so they went up out of Egypt, entered the land of Canaan, and came to Jacob their father. Now here's the part I know nobody's thinking about. You remember when Jacob left his brother to go to Haran? Because his brother wanted to kill him? This is generational oppression, isn't it? He was alone. And he goes up to Laban, he spends 20 years there. On his way, he has this unbelievable experience where he lays his head on a rock and he has a dream, and in the dream he sees a ladder going up to heaven, and he goes, I didn't know. I had no idea that everything my father and my grandfather told me is true. What? This is none other than the house of God and the gate of heaven. This is the Sharei HaShamayim, the gate of heaven. And then you can see throughout the story, God speaks to him. He talks to God, God speaks to him. God visits him, God visits him. But here's the real question. Watch what happens here. The scriptures in Hebrew, I read it in one of the commentaries, that when it describes it, when they tell him who it is, the Hebrew seems to imply that it was like Jacob had a heart attack, like he passed out unconscious on the ground. He was overwhelmed by the news. And of course it says they revived him because as he opened his eyes, he saw the carts coming. And they said, my boys don't own carts. Those are expensive carts. Those are Maserati carts. We don't have Maserati carts. And it says that his spirit began to revive. He came back to his senses. He came back to consciousness. And as he tells this story, and as this story unfolds, this is what they tell him. Joseph is still alive. He's the ruler over the whole land of Egypt. They reported everything. And when he saw the wagons which Joseph had sent to him, that his spirit of Jacob, their father, began to revive. In Hebrew, the commentators are saying that this is a person who's having a near-death experience. This is a person who's literally dying over the best news he's ever heard in his life. Because he's lived with a lie that they're dead all these years. So they reported everything that Joseph said to him. And it was only when he saw the wagons that Joseph sent to carry him that his spirit revived. And finally Israel said, enough! My son is still alive! I must go and see him before I die. Implying he almost died. I will not die! I'm going to go see my son. Now watch this. It says, chapter 46, verse 1, Israel took everything he owned. Sound familiar? With him on the journey. He took it, but this time he took everything he owned from the land of promise to go to Egypt. Now that made Jacob unbelievably uncomfortable. So in a vision, verse 2 of chapter 46, in a vision at night, God called to Jacob, Jacob, Jacob. He said, Hineni, here am I. My question is, how long had it been since Jacob heard God's voice? How long has it been? Don't make Jacob better than he is. It ruins the story. Come on now, think. Go scroll through what you know about this story. When was the last time he heard or saw a vision or heard from God? No, God didn't speak to him when he lost his son. God didn't say a word. Good try. The last time God, I believe, spoke to him. No. Well, no. It was, God spoke to him in Shechem, where his daughter Dinah was raped. He was angry at his sons. And God said, why don't you finish your journey? Why don't you go back the next 20 feet? You're only 2 miles away from the place you made a vow to me. If I go and I come back and you're bringing me to my father's house in peace, then you will be my God. You're only 2 miles away from completing the journey. And he said, okay, everybody pack everything you have, bury your idols in Shechem, let's go. And he went. And along the way in this journey, his wife, Rachel, dies giving birth to Benjamin on the road to Ephratah. Come on, this is beautiful. God's painting prophetic pictures in his word. He is opening the word of God to us. What I'm trying to say to you is that Jacob was in his grief in a black, dark depression for more than 13 years. Joseph left when he was 17 years old. Joseph is now 30-something. Jacob has been in this depression for 13 years. He hasn't heard a vision, hasn't had a dream. God hasn't spoken to him, and apparently he hasn't spoken to God. So now he's so revived that his son is alive. He goes to sleep that night, and now God finally speaks to him. And in a vision at night, God called to Israel, Yaakov, Yaakov, here am I, Lord. This tells you that God knows the thoughts before you think them. You could try to control your thoughts and your emotions, but God knows what's really going on. He said, look, I am God. Why is God reintroducing himself to Jacob? They're strangers, yes. He was estranged from his family, from his sons. His grief had become his God. The darkness he lived in and the brokenness of his relationships, and now he's broken his relationship with God. He doesn't even ask God what's going on. He just lives in depression. So God reintroduces himself in verse 3. I am God, the God of your father. Now notice, again, that God doesn't say, I'm the God of your father, Abraham and Isaac. He's saying, I'm the God of your father. Who's his father? Isaac. Isn't there something missing from this statement? Why is he the God of Isaac? Because he separated himself from God and chose to drown himself in darkness and depression and said, I don't need any help, I can do this myself. He ignored his wives, his family, his children. He lived as a self-imposed orphan with God, with man, with his sons, with his wives, and even the memory of his son Joseph. I am God, the God of your father. Now listen, I know what you're thinking. Don't be afraid to go down to Egypt. It's there that I will make you into a great nation. That's really, pardon my laughter, but isn't that going to be a 400 year of slavery? Yet God says, I'm going to make you a great nation. God's ways truly, who read that verse today? God's thoughts are as high above ours as the heavens above the earth, right? Troy said it. Good word. It is there that I will make you into a great nation. Not only will I go down with you. Notice that God doesn't explain the 400 years of slavery to him. Not only will I go down with you to Egypt, but listen to this, but I will also bring you back here again. After Joseph has closed your eyes. It's exactly what happens in the story. When Jacob dies, Joseph goes to Pharaoh and says, I got to bury my dad in the homeland. He goes, go ahead, take as long as you need. You want some money for Starbucks on the way? And he went and he buried his father in the land of Israel. And what was the response of the people in the land? Oh, look, the Egyptians are mourning the death of someone. Now, why is that important? It might give us some insight. Why did God choose slavery to make a nation great? Well, what would happen if they stayed accepted in Egypt? Joseph already speaks Egyptian. He's already got Egyptian kids with Egyptian names. His father-in-law is already running the religion of Egypt, and he's pretty much in charge of the nation. How long would he still think about the God of his father when he's named his children, the one who made me forget my family? How can you forget the family that's supposed to save the world through the coming of the Messiah? Joseph's pretty lost. So what would have happened if God just gave them favor in Egypt and they grew and they multiplied, then now none of them could be recognized as Jews. They were the most influential elites of Egypt, worshiping and walking around with an ankh around their neck. Even as slaves that were fed slave food, they still wanted, in the book of Exodus, they still want to go back to Egypt. They still thought Egypt looked good. Slavery even still looked good to them. So when you think about why is slavery an important ingredient, apparently those who overcome slavery and experience God as a redeemer that sets them free are a nation that's supposed to live in unbroken fellowship with God. Yet does Israel do that? If that were true, then the words of Ezekiel 37 would not have to be spoken by the prophet Ezekiel. Because the nation has died again. The temple has been destroyed. The nation has been cast out and brought to another nation in Babylon. And so God tells Ezekiel, prophesy over these bones and say to these dry bones, hear what Adonai has to say. To these bones, Adonai says, I will make breath enter you, and you will live. And I will attach ligaments to you and make flesh grow on you and cover you with skin and put breath in you, and you will live, and you will know that I am Adonai. All God wants us to know is He's there. But how often are we like Jacob? Go, I've tried God. That's a bunch of crap. A bunch of broken promises. Really. Say that long enough, and you'll find yourself having to prophesy over your own dead bones. So I prophesied as ordered, and while I was prophesying, there was a great noise, a rattling sound, and then the bones coming together, each bone in its proper place. Say to the breath that Adonai Elohim says, come from the four winds, O breath, breathe on these slain so that they can live. And so I did, and they stood up on their feet, a huge army. And who are these people? And they said to me, human being, these bones are the whole house of Israel. And they are saying, our bones have been dried up, our hope is gone, and we are completely cut off. That's how Jacob felt. But he's been revived. Because this faith of Judaism, this faith of Christianity, this faith of people who put their trust in Yeshua is a faith that believes in the resurrection power of God. Therefore prophesy to them and say, Adonai Elohim says, my people, I will open your graves and make you get up out of them. And then he says this, and listen, in the end of this chapter, verse 24, it says, and my servant David will be king over them, and all of them will have one shepherd, and they will live by my rulings and keep and observe my regulations. They will live in the land that I gave to Jacob, my servant, where our ancestors lived, and they will live there, and they and their children, their grandchildren forever. And David, my servant, will be their leader forever. The seed will be king forever. One final part that we have to cover. Acts chapter 9. When you control your emotions, you become a monster. Because the more you try to contain self-control for things that can't be controlled, the more you have to push your grief down. And when you push your grief down, you push it into your veins and your arteries. You store anger and bitterness in your heart and in your kidneys and in your liver and in your mind and in your brain. Acts chapter 9 tells us that after Yeshua came and died. Do you remember last week when I talked about the sermon of Stephen? And that how in the midst of being stoned to death, he told us about the story of Joseph. Well, who was watching? Who was holding the coats while they stoned? Rav Shaul. He wasn't throwing the stones, but he was holding them. And so he went to the leaders and he said, we have to stop these people. Chapter 9, verse 1, meanwhile Shaul, still breathing murderous threats against the Lord's Talmidim, went to the Kohen Hagadol and asked him for letters to the synagogues in Damascus. Damascus? Authoring him to arrest people that he might find men, women, or children who belong to this way and bring them back to Jerusalem. He was on the road on the way to Damascus. Where was Eliezer from? Damascus. How did he go back to Haran? Through Damascus. They don't have a lot of roads. They're traveling on the same road. Where is Haran? Do you remember what Haran represents? Glue. grief that is glued to the wrong place, right? Now Egypt's going to become a city glued to the wrong place. And now Rav Shaul is breathing out threats, rejecting Yeshua, killing Messianic Jews. When suddenly a light from heaven on the road to Damascus, the same road that Eliezer traveled, the same road that Jacob traveled when he went to Haran, the same way when he left Haran to come back to the promised land, he went through Damascus. And on that same road, this is what it says. He was on the road nearing Damascus when suddenly a light from heaven flashed all around him, and falling to the ground, he heard a voice saying to him, Shaul, Shaul, lama tirdefeni. Shaul, Shaul, why do you keep persecuting me? And just like Joseph or his brothers, Sir, who are you? He says. Anochi Yeshua, asher ta rodef. I am Yeshua, whom you are persecuting. But get up and go into the city, and you'll be told what you have to do. And he goes. And there's a Talmudim in that city named Hananiah. And Hananiah, the Lord speaks to him and says, Lord, many have told me about this man, how much harm he's done to your people in Jerusalem. And here he has a warrant from the head Kohanim to arrest everyone who calls on him. You want me to go pray for this man? And listen to what God says. But the Lord said to Hananiah, go, because this man is my chosen instrument to carry my name to the nations, even to their kings and to the sons of Israel as well. For I myself will show him how much he will have to suffer on account of my name. And when he goes and he prays for him, I want you to hear this. Listen to this prayer. It's the same experience we're reading about. Both Joseph and his brothers all experienced at the same time. And as Hananiah prayed for him, it says, and immediately something like scales fell from his eyes. And he also saw again. And having arisen, he was immersed. And having received nourishment, he was strengthened. What did Yeshua say to Peter? When you return, strengthen your brethren. And he was with the disciples in Damascus for a certain number of days. And immediately in the synagogues, he was proclaiming Yeshua, that he is the Son of God. And all those hearing him were amazed and said, is this not he who in Jerusalem destroyed those calling on this name, and who had come here for this intent, that he might bring them bound to the chief Kohanim? They're just as astonished as Joseph, just as astonished as Joseph's brothers, just as astonished as Jacob. Nobody's exempt from this. We live in this world that is guaranteed, if we don't pay attention, to blind us and give us no ability to hear or see or understand the purpose of God. And even a patriarch like Jacob can have a silent, broken relationship with God for all these years because he served his grief rather than the God who had already saved his son, but he did not know. Could he have ever, during those 13 years, said, oh Lord, is my son really dead? Do you think God wouldn't have answered that prayer? But apparently Jacob never. All the implications point that he didn't ask. I'm asking you. Closing with this verse, 2 Corinthians 5:16. People, you've been given a great gift today. You've seen that even the greatest men and women of God still need to be broken and still need to reject the lies that they live in so that they can actually hear God's voice, because without, as long as you maintain control, you don't need God's help. But when you finally realize how much help you need, you will call upon his name every day of your life. So 2 Corinthians 5:16 says this, so from now on we do not look at anyone from a worldly point of view. Even if we once regarded the Messiah from a worldly point of view, we do so no longer. Therefore, if anyone is united with Messiah, he's a new creation. The old has passed. Look, what has come is fresh and new. It's all from God, and through Messiah has reconciled us to himself and has given us this work of reconciliation, which is that God in the Messiah, the seed, the story of the seed we're reading about, was reconciling mankind to himself, not counting their sins against them. If he's not counting their sins against them, why do we? count sins against us. And entrusting to us the message of reconciliation. Therefore, we are ambassadors of the Messiah. In effect, God is making his appeal through us. Well, now you can go make that appeal, but do you still hate your brother? Do you still unforgive your father? Do you still have someone you hate? You can't be an ambassador unless you forgive. Unless you stop controlling everything